Stop wasting my money. Those 5 words hung in the air of the ridiculously expensive restaurant, a plume of toxic smoke in an atmosphere already thick with entitlement. My daughter, Chloe, didn't shout them. She didn't even raise her voice. She said them with a casual, dismissive flick of her wrist, as if shooing away a fly. The target of her irritation was a bottle of wine I had just ordered. It was a 1982 Bordeaux, a personal favorite, a quiet celebration for myself on the 5-year anniversary of selling the company I had built from nothing. A company whose sale had funded the very life she was now chastising me for enjoying a minuscule fraction of. Her husband, Mark, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically replaced with a gelatin mold, just smirked. He picked up his own glass, filled with a vintage that cost nearly as much, and took a theatrical sip. "She has a point, Dad," he chimed in, his voice smooth and condescending. "We have to be mindful of the portfolio's performance. The portfolio." He said it as if he had built it, as if he spent his days analyzing market trends instead of playing golf and ordering custom suits. The portfolio was my life's work, distilled into numbers on a screen. And they spoke of it as if it were a trust fund left to them by a distant departed relative, not the active, living fruit of my own labor. I looked at my daughter, my only child. I saw a stranger. Her face, which I once knew better than my own, was a mask of bored privilege. Her eyes, once wide with wonder at the world, were now narrowed, constantly calculating her own benefit. The hurt was a physical blow. It felt like a fist clenching around my heart, squeezing the air from my lungs. For years, I had mistaken her materialism for ambition, her selfishness for independence. I had been a fool. I had funded this monster's creation, and now it was turning on its creator. I just nodded slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I looked at the waiter, a young man with tired eyes, and said, "My apologies. Please, take the bottle away. My daughter is right. It was a foolish expense." The look of pity he gave me was almost worse than Chloe's scorn. Chloe beamed, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. "See? That wasn't so hard," she said, patting my hand as if I were a toddler who had just learned not to draw on the walls. The rest of the dinner was a blur of humiliation. They talked about their upcoming trip to Monaco, the new sports car Mark was having imported, and the renovations for the guest house on their sprawling property. My property, I thought, a small, cold stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. My car, my money. The bill came. It was obscene for figures for 3 people to eat. Without a word, I placed my black card on the small tray. The card with no credit limit. The card tied directly to the central operating account of my family office. The account that paid for their mortgage, their cars, their clothes, their vacations. The account that paid for literally everything in their lives. As Mark and Chloe stood up, ready to leave, she turned to me. "Thanks for dinner, Dad. We'll have the driver take you home." She didn't offer to share the ride. She didn't ask if I wanted to come back to their place. It was a dismissal. I was the wallet, and my services for the evening were no longer required. I watched them walk away, a handsome, vapid couple, completely oblivious. They had no idea what they had just done. They thought they had won a small victory, reigning in their dotty old father and his extravagant tastes. They had no idea they had just signed their own declaration of ruin. That night, I didn't sleep. The hurt had receded, replaced by something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. It was a clarity I hadn't felt in years, the same sharp-edged focus that had allowed me to build a software empire from a garage. For too long, my love for my daughter had been a fog, obscuring the reality of what she and her husband had become. The fog had now burned away. I sat in the study of my modest home, a place they hadn't visited in years because it was depressing and small. On my desk, I laid out the documents. Not all of them, but the important ones. The deed to their 5-bedroom mansion. My name was on it as the sole owner. They were listed legally as tenants at will. A lease agreement I had drawn up with my lawyer years ago, which they had signed without reading, stipulated a monthly rent of $1 payable upon request. I had, of course, never requested it. Then came the trust documents. I had set up a revocable living trust to manage their allowance. Mark was the beneficiary, but I was the sole trustee, with absolute and unconditional power to amend or dissolve the trust at any time, for any reason. He had access to the accounts for day-to-day spending, but the vast sums of capital that fed those accounts were entirely under my control. He thought he was the master of his universe. In reality, he was a child with a very generous piggy bank that I could snatch away at a moment's notice. Finally, the vehicle titles. The Porsche, the Range Rover, the ridiculous vintage convertible Mark paraded around town in, all registered to a holding company that I owned. They were, in effect, company cars for a job I didn't even know they had, the job of being my daughter and son-in-law, a job for which they were about to be fired. The phrase, "stop wasting my money," echoed in my head, not with pain anymore, but with a deep, chilling irony. Her money. She had never earned a single dollar in her entire adult life. She had a degree in art history she never used, and her only job was managing the social calendar that I funded. Mark had a consulting business, which meant he had a fancy website and business cards, but his only client was me. I paid him a ludicrous monthly retainer, funneled through the trust for strategic advice he was laughably unqualified to give. It was all a facade, a beautiful, expensive, hollow illusion I had built to make them feel important, to give them the life I thought would make them happy. And their response was not gratitude, but contempt. They saw my generosity not as a gift, but as an obligation. My wealth was not mine, it was theirs. And I, the source of it all, was just an inconvenient administrator, a bothersome old man who needed to be kept in line. Enough is enough. The thought wasn't angry. It was a simple statement of fact. A line had been crossed. A switch had been flipped. The loving, doting father was gone. In his place was the CEO, the man who had weathered corporate espionage, hostile takeovers, and market crashes. The man who understood that sometimes you have to cut off a diseased limb to save the body. The plan formed with crystalline precision. It would not be a screaming match. It would not be a dramatic confrontation. It would be silent. It would be swift. It would be total. I would not destroy them. I would simply stop. I would turn off the tap, and I would watch as the life they knew withered and died from thirst. I spent the next few hours on the phone and my computer. First, I called my lawyer, a man who had been with me for 30 years and knew where every single financial body was buried. It was 3 a.m., but he answered on the first ring, as I knew he would. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "It's time. Execute the Phoenix Protocol." The Phoenix Protocol was a contingency plan we had created years ago, half as a joke. It was designed for a worst-case scenario, a catastrophic lawsuit, a political upheaval, or, as it turned out, a complete and total familial implosion. It was a series of legal and financial maneuvers that would, within hours, consolidate all my liquid assets, sever ties with all dependents, and shield my core wealth behind an impenetrable fortress of offshore accounts and shell corporations. Arthur was silent for a moment. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice grave. "This is the big red button. Once we push it, there's no going back. It will be biblical, I'm sure," I said. "And Arthur, I want you to start the eviction process for the property on Oak Ridge Lane. Immediately. Give them the legal minimum notice. 30 days, consider it done," he replied, the surprise in his voice replaced by the crisp efficiency I paid him for. "I'll also have the paperwork drawn up to formally dissolve the M.K. Consulting retainer and the Challenger Trust. That's what I'd named it. A challenge for Mark to prove himself. A challenge he had failed spectacularly. Next, I logged into my private banking portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard. It was a symphony of digital destruction. The primary account that fed the Challenger Trust held a balance of several $1 million, a liquid buffer for their extravagant spending. With a few clicks, I initiated a wire transfer. I moved every single cent down to the last penny into one of my secure holding accounts in Switzerland. The transaction was instant. I imagined the look on Mark's face the next time he checked the balance, expecting to see a 7-figure number and finding nothing but a 0 and a few decimal points. Then, the credit cards. The black card I had used at dinner. The platinum cards in Chloe's and Mark's wallets. All of them were supplementary cards on my account. I navigated to the account management page. Deactivate card. Click. Confirm deactivation. Click. I did this 3 times. 3 small clicks that would sow chaos in their frictionless lives. The final piece of the pre-dawn purge was the cars. I sent a short, encrypted email to the manager of my holding company. Initiate repossession for all vehicles assigned to Mark and Chloe. Effective immediately. Provide no explanation. The sun was just beginning to streak the sky with gray and pink. I had been awake all night, but I felt energized, purged. The hurt was gone. The anger was gone. All that remained was a sense of calm, resolute purpose. I had made my decision. I had executed my plan. Now, all that was left was to disappear and watch the consequences unfold. I packed a single bag, a few changes of clothes, a passport, a laptop, and a few burner phones. My real home, the one they found so drab, would be empty when they eventually came looking. I had a small, anonymous apartment in the city I kept for situations like this, a place no one knew about. It was my bolt hole. Before I left, I took one last look around the study. I saw a framed photo on the desk. It was of Chloe, age 7, sitting on my shoulders at a county fair. She had a candy apple in one hand, and her face was split by a gap-toothed, joyous grin. A single tear, hot and unexpected, rolled down my cheek. I wasn't mourning the woman she had become, but the little girl I had lost along the way. I wiped the tear away, my resolve hardening once more. That little girl was gone. Actions have consequences. I walked out the door and didn't look back. The first text came at 10:17 a.m., and it was from Chloe. Dad, my card was just declined at Neiman's. It's so embarrassing. Can you call the bank and sort it out? They must have made a mistake. I looked at the message on the screen of the burner phone. I took a sip of my coffee. I did not reply. The second text arrived at 10:45 a.m. Mark's card was declined too. What is going on? This is a disaster. I have the caterer for the garden party waiting. Call me now, I read it. I continued reading my book. The silence, I knew, would be more infuriating than any argument. At 11:30 a.m., my phone began to ring. It was Chloe. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Mark. I let that go to voicemail too. For the next 2 hours, they alternated, a frantic digital ping-pong of calls and increasingly hysterical texts. Dad, the bank is saying the accounts have been closed. This isn't funny. Where are you? Your house is empty. We drove over, and no one is here. Mark tried to check the trust balance, and it's 0. 0, Dad. Is this some kind of sick joke? Did you get hacked? You need to fix this right now. The assumption, of course, was that this was a problem for me to solve. It hadn't yet dawned on them that I wasn't the victim of the problem, but the cause of it. The real fun began around 2 p.m. I received a forwarded email from my holding company. It was a screenshot of a text from Mark. My Porsche is gone. Someone stole my car right out of the country club parking lot. I'm calling the police. A follow-up email from my company manager simply said, repossession of Asset 1 complete. Asset 2, Range Rover, secured from the residence. Asset 3, convertible, to be collected this evening. Subject is agitated. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Agitated was the beginning. Their world was being dismantled piece by piece, and they still didn't understand who was holding the screwdriver. Late in the afternoon, the tone of the messages shifted from panicked and demanding to something bordering on pleading. Dad, please, just tell us what's happening. If you're upset about something, we can talk about it. Just answer the phone. They still thought they held the power. They thought this was a negotiation. They didn't realize their currency, my affection and guilt, had been devalued to nothing. The final blow of the day was delivered by Arthur, my lawyer. At 5:01 p.m., a certified letter was delivered to my mansion. I knew what it contained. It was a formal, legally binding notice of eviction. It gave them 30 days to vacate the premises. It also included a bill for $120, the accumulated back rent for the 10 years they had lived there at $1 per month. A petty, beautiful detail that Arthur had insisted on. The phone calls stopped. For a few hours, there was only silence. I knew what was happening. The reality was finally crashing down on them. The declined cards, the empty accounts, the missing cars, and now the eviction notice. The dots were connecting, forming a terrifying picture. They were no longer angry. They were scared. Around 9 p.m., a new text came through. It was from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Chloe. I'm using a friend's phone. I know you're doing this. Please, we need to talk. I'll come wherever you are. I am sorry. It was the first time I'd heard that word from her in a decade. But it was too late. The apology was not for the years of disrespect, for the entitlement, for the casual cruelty. It was an apology born of desperation. It was a key for a lock I'd already changed. I replied for the first time. My message was simple. My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Come alone. I gave them the address of a small, rented office space I sometimes used in neutral ground. The next morning, I was there at 9:30. I sat behind a simple metal desk. On it were 3 neat stacks of paper. Nothing else. No photos. No decorations. This was not a father's study. This was a boardroom. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened. It was Chloe and Mark. So much for come alone. I suppose they thought they needed to present a united front. They looked terrible. Chloe's eyes were red and puffy, her expensive clothes rumpled. Mark looked like a ghost, his usual smug confidence completely gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed fear. They stood there, uncertainly, like children called to the principal's office. "Sit." I set my voice flat. I didn't gesture to the chairs. They found them on their own. Chloe started to speak, her voice trembling. "Dad, I don't understand. I think you do." I interrupted, my voice calm and even. "But just in case there's any confusion, let's be perfectly clear." I slid the first stack of papers across the desk. "This is the deed to the house you live in. As you can see, my name is the sole owner. You are tenants. Your tenancy has been terminated. You have 29 days left." She stared at the paper, her face ashen. Mark picked it up, his hands shaking as he read the legal language. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. This is our house," he stammered. "No," I said, my voice cutting through his denial. "This is my house. You have been living in it, rent-free, for a decade." I slid the second stack of papers over. "These are the incorporation documents for the holding company that owns your cars. Or rather, owned. They're company assets that have been recalled. And this," I added, pushing a single sheet toward them, "is the termination of your consulting agreement, effective 2 days ago. Your final retainer was your last payment." Mark's jaw worked silently. He looked like he had been punched. Chloe began to cry, fat, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "And finally," I said, pushing the third and final stack across the desk, "this is the charter for the Challenger Trust, the trust that provided your lifestyle." I've highlighted the relevant section. Article 10, Section 4. The trustee, at his sole and absolute discretion, may dissolve this trust at any time, for any reason. Without notice or justification, I exercised a discretion yesterday morning. The trust is dissolved. The accounts are closed. The money is gone. Chloe finally found her voice, a choked, desperate whisper. "Why? Why would you do this to us?" I leaned back in my chair and looked at her, really looked at her. The mask was gone. All the arrogance, all the condescension had been stripped away. All that was left was a terrified woman, utterly lost. "You asked me to," I said quietly. She looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I let the silence hang in the air for a beat. "At dinner," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You told me to stop wasting my money, your words, not mine. I took your advice to heart. I have stopped wasting it." The comprehension that dawned on her face was a terrible thing to watch. It was the moment the spoiled child finally understands that the game is real. The floor has given way, and the fall is long. "But that was just. I didn't mean," she stammered, her hands fluttering helplessly. "You meant every word," I stated. "You and your husband have viewed me as nothing more than a walking, talking ATM for years. You live in my house, you drive my cars, you spend my money, and you have the audacity to treat me with contempt. You believe my life's work belongs to you. You are mistaken." Mark, finding a flicker of his old arrogance, spoke up. "You can't just do this. We'll sue you. We have rights." I almost laughed. "Sue me for what? For evicting tenants from my property? For repossessing company cars? For dissolving a trust that I am the sole trustee of and that I created with my own money? Arthur, my lawyer, would love to see that filing. You find it amusing when people who have never read a contract try to argue its terms. I stood up. The meeting was over. The world you knew is gone. It was an illusion, and the illusion is over. Your clothes, your jewelry, the things in the house. They are yours. I have no interest in them. You have 29 days to sell what you can and find a new place to live. I suggest you start looking for jobs. Real ones. Chloe was openly sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. Please, Daddy, please, she begged, using a name she hadn't called me in 20 years. Don't do this. I'm sorry. We're so sorry. Your sorrow is a day late and millions of dollars short, I said, my voice hard. This is not a punishment. This is a consequence. You wanted me to stop wasting my money. Done. The rest is up to you. Welcome to the real world. I hope you find it less disappointing than you found my taste in wine. I walked to the door and held it open. They stumbled out, dazed and broken. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving me feeling hollow and weary, but also free. The aftermath was predictable. They tried everything. They called my old number. They left messages with distant relatives. They even had a lawyer send a blustering, toothless letter to Arthur, which he returned with a single, highlighted copy of the trust dissolution clause. They were adrift. For the first month, they stayed with friends, hopping from guest room to guest room, quickly wearing out their welcome as the reality of their situation became clear to their fair-weather social circle. Mark, it turned out, had no marketable skills beyond a decent golf swing. Chloe discovered that an art history degree doesn't pay the rent. I watched from a distance, through quiet inquiries made by Arthur. They sold her jewelry. They sold his designer watches. They sold their clothes at a high-end consignment shop. Everything they owned was converted to cash. They ended up in a small, one-bedroom apartment in a part of town they used to mock. Mark found a job selling insurance, working on commission. Chloe became a barista at a coffee shop. They were learning, the hard way, the value of a dollar they had earned themselves. I never saw them again. A few years later, Arthur informed me that Chloe had filed for divorce from Mark and had moved to a different state, trying to start over. I felt a pang of something, not sadness, but a distant, melancholy acknowledgement of a story that had ended. As for me, I found peace. I traveled. I read books. I drank good wine without anyone telling me it was a waste. I reconnected with the man I was before the money, before the obligations, before the corrosive entitlement of my own child. I did not cut her out of my will. The Phoenix Protocol had restructured everything, but my final estate would be divided. Half would go to charity. The other half would go into a new trust for Chloe. But this one was different. It was an ironclad, unchangeable testamentary trust. She couldn't touch the principal. It would pay her a modest, fixed annual stipend, enough to ensure she would never be destitute, but not nearly enough to rebuild her old life of luxury. It was a safety net, not a throne. It was the last act of a father, not a financier. Some might call what I did cruel. Some might call it heartless. But I call it justice. It was the most painful lesson I ever had to teach, and the most necessary. Actions have consequences. And sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is to let their children finally, truly, feel the weight of their own choices.